When I was 4, this was back in 1964, so I'll let your listeners do the math, but this was before we had terms like near-death experience. So you just have an experience without a word for it or a phrase. And also being that young, it's just an experience in your day because there's no before and after. But what did happen was this was in the summer of 1964, and I was swimming in or rather just kind of wading in a pool in our apartment complex. My mother was there. She's a nurse. My older sister was there. We were in the shallow end, just kind of splashing around. And my brother was 18 months old and he was in the kiddie pool, which was a separate pool. So my mother was keeping an eye on all of us. It was very crowded that day because it was so hot and there were lifeguards. But what happened was I was bobbing and splashing around and I was going backwards and the pool sloped down. So as I continued to go back, at one point my feet did not hit the bottom. So I flailed and gulped water because I didn't, know what to do. And then I continued to gulp water because I couldn't get a footing. And so that's what happened. I continued to swallow the water and then everything went black. I lost consciousness um, in my body. And then I'm not sure because time warps, but the next thing my consciousness was aware of is that me was floating on the edge of the pool up and above it. And I could see my physical body on the bottom of the pool. And back then you had to wear these little caps that were kind of plastic. And I had on a pink plasticky looking cap. And I could see that color shimmering through the water of the pool. And I had no doubt at 4 years old that that was me too, and that was me too. So here's a physical body that is unconscious, and there's a conscious me that is observing my physical body. I don't question this because I'm just experiencing it. So technically, I'm having a near-death experience with an out-of-body component and a consciousness outside of my physical body that's observing this experience. And that's all fancy way of saying I'm 4 years old and I have two experiences going on at the same time, one of being drowned and the other of observing that, knowing that obviously there is something outside of my physical self. So mom didn't see my little pink cat bobbing, and she came to the edge of the pool and saw me down there. She was able to get me out. And because she's a nurse, she knew how to revive me. Well, years and years later, we talked about it. We didn't, in that time, you just have to remember 1964, that this stuff happened. People didn't make a big deal about it. If you didn't die completely or you couldn't be revived, that was a different story. Or if you couldn't be revived, that was different. But if you could, okay, you had an experience, move on. That's how life was back then. So when mom revived me, and she said later, for a while you weren't with us. You were blue and you were not breathing. So as a nurse and from her clinical perspective, she knew that I was almost gone. And I also knew too in that time that in being out of my body too, at 4 years old, I was embraced in kind of love and security and bliss that was so safe. I did not want to come back. And I've been very honest about my experiences as a child. My father was dealing with a lot of depression, and that resulted in a lot of heavy drinking in an alcoholic way. So it was a pretty hard childhood with a lot of explosive emotions and things. And it didn't feel safe to me as being already a sensitive child. But being in this element of absolute safety and pure bliss, um, I did know I had a choice to make. And I felt my mother's feelings. And when I say I mean that consciousness out of my body felt my mother's feelings. And I knew that if I didn't come back, her heart would be so broken and she would never, never recover from this. And I also knew that if I came back, it was not going to be an easy path. And um, I certainly wanted to stay in that blissful place, but the for my mother was stronger. And so I made the decision to return to my body and go on from there. So that was my childhood near death experience, again with no words. And I can't say that I was changed from it because there's no before. and after necessarily, because you're still developing, and each day in a 4 year old's life is just a day, and those experiences are just experiences, and you don't really evaluate so much as just accept them. And so I just accepted that and knew from that day on that there was more than my physical body and that I had a consciousness outside of it. Now, what happened was that conscious experienceness of that connection to that other side, that portal, if you will, was stayed open. I didn't know that at the time, but what it resulted in was the after effects that you hear about now, but again, no discussions around it. And that was that I became what we would call very psychic or very intuitive, very aware. I had experiences that were frightening to me in terms of seeing spirits, and they didn't always look very pleasant. I could sense things and feel things. I knew things before they happened. So again, we have words like precognition, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. I had it all. I could smell things. I could see things. I could see remotely. I just knew things. And so my whole childhood was like that. And I thought everyone could do that. That's why I didn't think I was any different until I began to speak about what I was perceiving or experiencing, and finding out that people did not function at this level, and in fact thought I was kind of a freak, and that shut me down. And so I became very withdrawn and very painfully shy, and just kind of, I won't say I was depressed, but it was just such a jarring disconnect between what I'd experienced of that truth and beauty and love on the other side versus this life where people just lied, and you could see they were lying. Their spirit was not right. And I could see it as a child, and I'm thinking, why are people like this, or people being cruel? And growing up in the home I did, it was like, why is this like this? Don't people know that they could be loving and wonderful and kind? Don't they know this? Don't they know what's on the other side? And the answer was no, they did not. And so I went to church. I'd always felt a close affinity to that, the creator of our universe, whatever church. It didn't even matter to me. It wasn't about religion. It was just being in a place where people were focused on something outside of themselves that might be good, and that might be, focused on our creator. And so that was a very important part of my childhood, was being there with my grandparents. Because of the turbulence at our home, we spent a lot of time with my grandparents, who are a very important force in my life. My grandfather, my mother's father, identified as a Native American man at a time when being Native American was not a popular thing. He was born in 1898, and that was his understanding. And we don't have any tribal enrollment, but I respect what he had to tell us about his understanding of his um, awareness of being Native American, which he called Indian at that time. And my grandmother was Pennsylvania Dutch, which now they call Pennsylvania German. So these are very different people who came together in life, but they shared a bond of just understanding there was a spiritual connection outside of themselves. And because of the way that they were respectively raised, they accepted a little bit of the unusual things. And my grandfather called me his little powwow, which in the Native American community means healer, or, it's like a healer term. And as I later found out just a few years ago, in the Pennsylvania Dutch community or Pennsylvania German community, they have powwowers who, not related to the Native American term, who are of the Pennsylvania Dutch confluence, and they also perform their own types of folk healing. So they're both healers. So the fact that the powwow term just kept coming up in my life when I came back from that, I really was filled with that sense of compassion and care, and wanting to help people to understand the truth about love and connection and kindness, and that we're all human family and we have to be nice to each other. Now that sounds terribly naive, but I'm 4, I'm 5, I'm 6, I'm 7, and I still have hope that people just need information, that this will help them to understand how to be in the world better. So these were some of the after effects of that experience at such a young age. And then having the psychic part of it too, without any real guidance was a tough experience. But again, that's where we were. So let me pause there and see what questions you have or might want to have before I move on.
Oh, that's incredible and amazing that that term power kept coming up as well. I mean, nothing's an accident, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, I just did. Was there anybody that you did connect to? Was there somebody that understood what you'd gone through, or was it something that you just had to keep to yourself that entire time?
Well, I think my grandparents got it to a point, but it's still things were happening that were out of their even frame of reference. And again, grandma was not unused to having communications that didn't make logical sense. Being in her family, she would report, she would know when someone died in her family because she'd hear three audible knocks on her door. So that was, it didn't matter where she was, she knew someone had died. And so we kind of accepted that. And my grandfather had always taught me to listen to the wind and communicate with the trees. Now that sounds very 1970s, but we were still in the 60s, and that's how he felt. If you would just listen to Earth and respect that nature, he understood that messages and communication comes from other types of ways. So they were a little more open. My mother was pretty open too, and I guess she had to be because of me, because there were things that I knew that there was absolutely no way I could. And also one experience when I would say my grandparents were very aligned, or as much as aligned as they could be, but there was still an experience that my cousin talked about later on, and I guess I was still fairly young, and I was at my grandparents, and my grandmother was out of the house. My cousin was there with my grandfather and me, and they were having a late snack or lunch or whatever, but I had been put down for a nap. So I must have been about maybe shortly after the drowning incident. So it was probably 4 or 5. And my cousin reported that she and grandpa were talking, and then they look up and see me standing at the kitchen door looking in at them. And grandpa looks at me and says, "You're supposed to be in bed," and claps his hands. And then I disappeared right in front of their eyes. Well, grandpa and my cousin were so freaked out, they jumped up from the table and they ran to the room where I was sleeping. Well, apparently, because I was so small and the bed was high, there were little steps to get into the bed. The time that it took for them to get down the hall to where I was sleeping, there was no way I could have run from there, climbed up the steps, gotten under the covers, and looked sound asleep, which is what I was when they found me. And plus, I was not a devious child at all anyway, so I would not have done that. I just wasn't like that. But there I was, sound asleep in the bed. Well, Grandpa apparently was very upset by that. And when my grandmother came home, he told her what had happened and said, "I don't understand how that happened. I don't understand how we saw her in the kitchen, and we both saw her. And then but she was asleep in the bed." We didn't have terms for like bilocation, which is the term that we know now. Um, but I was used to being out of my body. And I remember floating around my grandparents' house, floating outside, checking things out. And it wasn't anything willful, it was just part of my experience. So, but again, I was asleep at that time. So it's not like I had decided I was going to go look at my grandfather or my cousin. Um, but that's what happened. But what later happened is that I didn't have to be out of my body to see things from a different distance. That just seemed to be because I could be out of my body and see my body in the bottom of the pool. I had that same capability to be out of, to be in my body, awake, and see things from another distance. And when I say see, I don't mean with my eyes, I mean with my spiritual eyes. So these things just happened. And again, it's taken me years and years and years to process through how to even explain this in a way that might make sense and try to find terminology that now researchers have been doing since, the 70s, 80s, 90s, even the late 60s with Duke University and Dr. J.B. Rhine's research into parapsychology, and then all the research that's gone on with remote viewing at Stanford and then at UVA with reincarnation research and near-death experience and after-death communications. So all of these weird things apparently that I'd experienced throughout my lifetime are now being validated by research. And so that's very comforting to me. I'm grateful for it because I feel like when we have words for experiences, it helps to normalize them and opens the door for greater communication. And I found, and one of the reasons why I'm sharing my story at this stage in life is because more and more people are having these experiences, and they need to be able to not feel shamed or frightened of them. They need to be able to have a conversation, and they need to be able to have support on these things. And so that's been part of the reason for why I continue to do these types of podcasts, because it is important. And particularly now, wherever you are in the world, everyone I've talked to in this world, and I've gotten lots and lots and lots of communications from all over, everyone is struggling with the same types of things because there's one common denominator we all share wherever we are, whether we're in, Indonesia or Spain or England or France or wherever. We're all human, and we all want pretty much the same things. And we all stay alive by having our basics of food, clothing, and shelter met. We can't live. So we are all in one human family, and we're so connected this way. And that's why I keep saying everybody needs to focus on love and care for one another, because if they don't, we've got what we've got right now worldwide, which is ignorance, strife, cruelty, all the things that are lack of love. And so this is so important to me, Natasha, and that's why I'm really grateful to have this time to just share my unusual experiences, but to really remind people of why I'm doing it because of the information I got at 4 years old about love.
Yeah. No, well, I agree with you. And I actually, I've got a guest lined up who's going to be talking about raising vibration because spirit is calling for it now. It's like,
Yes.
hurry up! We need to wake people up fast. It's not even a matter of just taking your time anymore. But I wanted to ask you, I've never heard of anyone bilocating before like you have, where somebody has seen the spirit of you.
Hmm.
Unless they were able to see spirits, but if they hadn't,
Hmm.
if they're not able to and they saw you, that you must have almost like materialized in front of them. Do you remember being present, or were you just completely asleep?
I was completely asleep. I have no memory of the incident at all and didn't even hear about it until years and years later at a family reunion. At this time, I was an adult. They didn't see me as looking transparent. They thought I was fully there. I looked fully like a presence of myself to them. So
I wonder if they're able to, like, when somebody has resonance with somebody else, that they're able to pick up on their energy, that they had that ability because you're family and they know you.
that's possible. Except, well, I mean, I think that is possible. And I would say Grandpa was still freaked out about it, even if he had that ability. He'd never experienced something quite like that.
Yeah, yeah, that would speak anybody. Okay, so yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah, you can continue. So after that, what happened?
Well, after that, I continued to grow up, and my way of coping in the world was to help others. And that was just part of that experience that I had. I mean, I realized this world is in need of a lot of healing and reminders about love and care. And so I chose a path that, even though it was difficult in my childhood, I had choices to make about how I was going to react to those things. I mean, I saw a lot of my peers at that time, turning to drugs or other behaviors that just weren't in their best interest. And I decided that I was going to establish financial independence, meaning I worked two jobs in high school. I was a volunteer at a crisis center after school program and for inner city kids, and I was a tutor there. I volunteered as a peer counselor in my high school, which meant we went to elementary schools and tried to help kids think about decisions they're making and decide what's a good choice versus not so good, and things that were empowering. So those were the ways that I kind of coped with my childhood. And while I was at that after school program, one of the volunteers was a retired engineer from a naval base, and he was very interested in the remote viewing experiments that were going on at Stanford University. So we would, there were a lot of runaway children too. That was part of why the crisis center part of the program dealt with people calling in about that. And so we would try to do remote viewing experiments where, because of that ability I had, and he was, respectful of it. But it wasn't like they were doing it where someone would drive somewhere and then I'm supposed to sit there and draw a picture. My gift did not work that way. And I'm a terrible drawer anyway. I just stick figures is about all I can manage. But there has to be a caring component to this, for me, in order for me to kind of activate in this way. And I say that on one hand. On the other, I've had unbidden things happen too. So that's a separate thing, and we can talk about that in a moment. But in this experience, what I could do was, they would give me a name of a person who'd run away. And so I would sit there quietly and just try to connect with them, with their spiritual energy. And for whatever reason, they might have run away. If there was abuse or a problem in the home, that's one thing. But if they were just upset about life or just choosing something and now they were scared and didn't know what to do, I'd just say, call home, just call home, just call home. And I'd send that message, call home, it's okay. And so we were surprised that many kids did. And so, that could have just happened anyway and had absolutely no relationship to what we were doing. But it happened a lot when we did it. And so, I thought, well, that's something to look at. And what it also did for me was, this man would explain to me how he was evaluating things versus chance versus not chance. I didn't understand mathematics or statistics very well. But what it did for me is to help me understand how to analyze these things, to understand better whether I was actually being useful or helpful. And that was the yardstick I measured everything. Was I being useful or helpful? Was I, or was I not? Because that was what was important to me. And I felt from that decision point I'd made to come back to this life that that was going to be the journey I was going to walk, and it was also going to be the choice point I'd be having to make everywhere along this line. And it would challenge me to look at where areas where I was not doing my best, or where I was being selfish or egotistical, or any of those things that, were just dragging me down to a human level where I wasn't being my higher self best, because that higher self, held me to a higher standard. And it wasn't easy just being a plain old human. I always felt like I had my observer self looking over saying, really? Really? Can't you do a little better here? Or check yourself, So it was this internal editor, I guess, sometimes a critic, sometimes a champion, but I always felt like that part of me was always staying aligned with what was higher and best, and calling me to remind me of that as I lived this life. So that's what happened.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, you'd be a tough taskmaster, but you've got something that you won't live with regrets. I hear a lot of people saying, "I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd, loved more, taken more risks." You are not going to have that because you're doing as much as you possibly can. You're living it all the time.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. However, I'm still a human being having this life experience, even with a spiritual awareness. Natasha, that does not make me immune from stumbling, making mistakes, being human. And, I'm also candid too. I went through a period where I could not quiet the noise in my mind. I had a son. I wasn't married at the time, and he had a lot of problems with, birth problems, and then later on, learning disabilities and cognitive processing issues, and so it was incredibly challenging. And then later on, I got married and had a second son, and he had epilepsy. Well, both of my sons had special needs, and I was struggling, and the marriage did not work out, and I found myself drinking too much and relying on wine at night, to kind of help me deal with quieting my mind. Well, that's the pathway to alcoholism. I didn't want to go there. but I could see I was at risk. So, these were really hard times. And they brought me to my knees too, because I was failing myself and I just didn't know how to manage all these awful feelings of feeling like a failure as a parent because my sons were struggling so badly and I couldn't fix it. Here I worked so hard to be loving and compassionate and helpful, and I couldn't fix my children. And so that was really heartbreaking for me. But again, I have a choice. This is the life lesson and situation that was in my life. So what was I going to do about it? So what I did do was I ended up taking myself to some 12-step meetings to address my drinking problem and acknowledge that I now had one. And it was up to me to do something about it because that's what love and compassion expected of me. It's not a problem to have a problem, but I had a choice what I was going to do about it. And that's when I made that choice to continue on with that pathway, which has been very helpful over the years. And then I ended up doing Reiki training. And I did my mastership with the Usui model for 7 years. And then I did the Holy Fire model with William Rand's group. So all of these were different types of Reiki training, but I loved working with energy. And my mother had trained in the nursing model by Dolores Krieger, which was healing touch, no, therapeutic touch, excuse me. There's healing touch, but therapeutic touch is the Dolores Krieger nursing model. And my mother had trained at the hospital and taught student nurses this model and had shown me the power of energy work to soothe stressful situations, help ease pain, those sorts of things. So it made sense to me that that might be useful for my children. So I learned Reiki and just found the power of that. And life just continues on. At this point now, we'll fast forward into the things that happened later. And here I was 45, I'm a single mom, and I decide that I had already gotten my master's degree in public health to help my children because I wasn't pleased with how the medical establishment at that time dealt with children with ADHD and epilepsy. I was like, well, what about the foods they're eating? I felt like they needed a more holistic approach. How is that figuring into their neurobiology and healing? So I did my whole master's work in that area and looking to essential fatty acid like fish oil, things like that, which now we know is important. But this was back in the 90s before this came on the scene. So I ended up going on for my PhD in public policy and administration, and part of that, as I was doing that, I taught as an adjunct a class on marriage and family relationships because I'd taken that class before. It was an upper level sociology or social sciences course, and I figured I'd made all the mistakes you could, so I could at least help the students in what not to do. But it was a great class, and my students taught me so much. And all this happened right around the same time that this man that is the subject of the shared near-death experience that came to happen. All this happened around that time, and so I was teaching the class. I had stopped going to 12-step meetings because I was so busy with going to school and teaching and being a single parent. And I barely had enough gas money to put in my car to get to school. And I was a graduate teaching assistant. I just had a lot going on. So, but I'd heard some from friends of mine that I used to go to these meetings with about this man who had come to town from the West Coast. He was doing a contract job, a super nice guy, and he was gotten deathly ill and was now in the ICU and had been for now 3.5 weeks and was dying and was in a coma with just everything shut down. And the only thing keeping him alive at that point were machines. And I thought, oh, well, that is really awful. How sad, for for this man and his family. And my friends really were upset about him because he was such a special person to them. And thought, well, I didn't know him, but I could see the impact he was having on these folks. So the woman that I'd known before told me she was going to a meeting that I used to go to and asked me to come that night. And this was September 22nd of 2005, 20 years ago. And she was going to pick up her 20-year coin Well, it turned out this man, his name is David, um, his mother flew in from San Francisco that morning. She was called by the hospital to come say goodbye. And she came to the meeting that night because she was also in recovery and to thank everybody for the kindness they'd shown her son because he also was in recovery and that she appreciated the community that they had provided for him. People from that community had shown up every day in the hospital and ICU to pray with him and to hold his hand and just show up and bring that fellowship there. And she was standing there with such a look of peace and resignation. And she'd said she'd signed the funeral directives and had come on to this meeting. They didn't expect him to last the night. And folks that I hadn't seen in a long time were standing around crying. And it just really touched my heart. And I thought, wow, this was really sad. This must be a great guy. And so we went through the meeting. At the end of it, I was going to go up and say to her how sorry I was, but it was one of those moments where something comes out of your mouth that your brain didn't plan on. And what I said to her was, I don't think you should give up hope yet. Now, she looks at me as though I'm crazy because she just said she'd signed the funeral directives. And I said, and my mind immediately kicks in like, oh my God, why did I say that? And it's like, I didn't say that. My knowing said that. It's like, but now my knowing said something that my head now has to address. So I told her, look, I told her I did Reiki. Being from San Francisco area, she was well aware of these alternative methods. And but I was also on a prayer team at the church I was attending at that time. And I offered to go and pray with him if he was still around and to do some Reiki if she would like me to do that. And I told her that if he was going to pass, I would hold his hand and I would pray with him if she would like me to do that. So she said yes, but this is Thursday night. We have now, I'm not going that night because I've got to get home. So the question mark was, would he even be alive the next day? And if you have people who are or clinicians or whatever, I just want to say what he had was so dire. And I tell you this because it's so stunning what did later happen. In addition, he had what was called Wegener's granulomatosis, which is a very rare form of vasculitis. And what that means is that little nodules get into the organs and the vessels and create scar tissue. So it had done that to his kidneys, which were in complete failure, and now they were scarred and destroyed. And kidneys do not regenerate. They might have returned to a tiny bit of function, but at this point they were completely outdone. He was also in acute respiratory failure. He had a chest tube because one lung had collapsed. He had double pneumonia. He had sepsis. He had atrial fibrillation. He had blood clots. And it just, everything had cascaded in a way that was just catastrophic. Then he wasn't getting enough oxygen from the ventilator after 3.5 weeks of being, and he was what they said, he was in a paralytic coma. So he couldn't even move or respond. And so he was on death's door. And but I didn't know that when I agreed to go see him. I just knew he'd been catastrophically sick and thought, well, okay. But so I went to the hospital the next morning and I'd said my prayer. I had a class to teach at noon. And so I didn't know what I could possibly do. And my brain at this point is just kicked in like, why did you agree to do this? You don't know the man. You don't have the gas in your car. He's dying. He's probably not even going to be there when you get there. And but I said, okay, God, this is your deal. If you want me to help this man, then if he's still there when I get there, I'll do what I can. So I got to the hospital and he was still alive. And so I'd never seen anyone in acute kidney failure, so I didn't realize that the whole body swells up. And he was totally swollen. He had the sheet on, and just the machines were beeping and making noise, and the ventilator was whooshing, and that was it. Just the machines were keeping him alive, but he had the feeding tube in the nose. He had the central line. He had tubes, and he'd had multiple blood transfusions, just everything to keep him going. And so I took his hand. My mother had always said when somebody is unconscious, even if they're in a coma, to talk to them like they're awake. So I introduced myself because he didn't know me. I'm a stranger. And I told him why I was there because I'd met his mother the night before and many of the friends that he had, and that a lot of people really seemed to care about him and love him. And that's why I was here. And that if he would like for me to pray with him, I would do so. And if he would like me to do some Reiki with him, I would do so also. But I would need his permission. And a lot of people have said, well, why ask permission? But there's a psychology to it. It's also it's a matter of respect. It's a matter because this I'm not someone's healer. They're the healer. I'm just the facilitator, and their journey is up to them, not me. So I don't just throw healing at anybody. I ask permission or if they invite me to, but he wasn't in a situation to ask. But I knew he was okay with me being there, and I told him I could feel if it would be okay, and I stood there for a moment, and I felt a puff of air, like a little puff, and it was not the machine. So I took that as permission, and I took his hand, and I began an opening prayer, just giving thanks for this time and using some affirmative prayer techniques that I had learned. But when we connected briefly, I just felt real sorrow from him and real sadness. And it just really touched me. And I just wasn't sure all the feelings that I was feeling where they were coming from, but I could just feel that he had a sense of shame too. So I went through and I did my Reiki as best I could, trying not to dislodge anything. And I didn't feel a lot of energy around him at that point. I did feel like he was hovering out of his body and ready to go. And I thought and then I took his hand to say the final closing. And I just said, whatever has happened in your life, just know that the God of my understanding is so great that there's nothing you could have ever done that God would not love you. And you are loved, and you can go in peace if that's what you want to do. And if you decide that you have unfinished business, then I will make you a promise that if you decide you want to stick around, I will come back. And so that's what happened. So I wasn't sure what he would decide. I didn't know what his body would be capable of. Even if he wanted to come back, would he be able to? Because he was so catastrophically ill and the kidneys were destroyed, and he had a long road, and he may have had brain injury that he could not recover from as well. So, but again, I didn't know all that at the time, how severe it was, because if I had, I may not have gone. I may have thought I just can't do anything for him except hold his hand while he passes. And I would have done that out of courtesy of his mother, but it would have, I don't know. There were just so many conflicting thoughts and feelings in my mind at this time because I couldn't understand this pull I was having toward this very ill person. Well, he survived that night, and I came back the next day. And that's when things started to really shift. So when I came back, he was still unconscious. He had not really responded, but he was still hanging on. So I worked with him for a few days, and then a tiny, tiny bit of urine started to flow, which we took as a very good sign. And then, again, his nephrologist and the doctor, the nurses there said, well, a little bit of recovery can happen, but that's it. That level of damage, he will be on dialysis for the rest of his life if he survives. And because of what he had, because it's chronic, he would not be eligible for a transplant list because even if he lived, the prognosis is maybe 8 years because of the level of damage. So, so that would be what that would be. And so I continued to do my prayers. I did Reiki, and I started to feel more energy ramping up with him. But I could still feel he wasn't really there. Having had the experience of being out of my body, I could sense that he wasn't quite there. He was hovering like I had hovered. And then there came the day, a few days in, where I started working with him, and I always did an opening prayer for protection and guidance for his very highest and best, and full of gratitude to our Creator. And as I was standing there holding his hand at his bedside in my physical body, my consciousness shifted, And then I was not in my physical body anymore, just like I wasn't at the bottom of the pool. I was somewhere else. And in that moment, I was in this place of light and love, similar to how it was when I drowned, but even much greater than that. It was like, I call it like billions of points of liquid love light dots, although there's nothing wet about it. I just, to this day, there's no way I have words for the physical textures and feelings. So that's the best way I can describe it. And I was just surrounded in this loving, loving light of forever time. You're just, it's an infinity. It's infinity there. And there's just no time. I'm just there in this love. And it's like having a near death experience, except I'm not the one dying. He is. And that's where I met him. That's where his spirit was hovering. And I told him later, I said, I think you pulled me out of my body to come be with you in that moment to say hello and goodbye because his body had been so damaged. But what happened was, in that spiritual moment of connection, I just knew everything about him. I knew he knew everything about me. I knew I'd always loved him, even though we'd never met in this lifetime. And I just loved him. And but it was the kind of love that was so huge, so great, that it wanted whatever was best for him. Now, of course, I would want him in my life, my partner, right? But if his spirit needed to go, that's what love would want, wouldn't it? Love wants what's best for the other, even if it didn't include me, because that's what love is. It was so unselfish, so unconditional, just so amazing. It was every kind of love you could possibly imagine in this mix. And then I'm back in my body, holding his hand at the bedside, looking at this unconscious stranger kept alive by the machines, wondering what just happened. And I've met the soulmate, this person, that this energy, the spirit that I absolutely has expanded my heart. I completely love this person, and he's a stranger dying here. I can't even begin to tell you what a shocking experience, how hard it was to process. I couldn't even process what had happened. First of all, just being spontaneously out of my body in that conscious state and meeting him that way, not knowing whether he was going to go on or how I could possibly come back. But I continued to work with him. And over the 12-day period, things happened that I'd never experienced in all my weird childhood and life. And that was one night I was in bed, and this is I guess this is about the sixth or seventh day in. And after that meeting, and I'm seeing, again, like I said, seeing with my mind's eye, not my physical eyes. It's like I'm in his room, hovering in his hospital room, and I see these four beings, and they appear to me to be the shade of blue. Now, they're tall, they look human, but they're tall, and they have very sharp-looking features and very quick movements, and they're at each end and each side of him. And I see they look like a medical team to me. They look like they're in scrubs, but they're blue, head to toe, eyes, everything. And what I see is, what I perceive is holographic like kidneys being descending into his physical body, like the energy kidneys descending into his body. They're blue too. And I think I think I'm falling asleep, or must have fallen asleep, and maybe I'm having a dream, except that what I call the lead doctor looks up like they're seeing my presence, my spiritual energy there, and nods. I say it's a he, his head at me, like, we've got this. And so they continue working, and I go to sleep back in my bed, and I wake up the next morning thinking, was this some sort of odd dream? But it seems so real. So I went to the hospital that morning. I got really early and went there. I took all of the things I'd been at that point. In addition to Reiki, I was taking music to keep his brain stimulated, aromatherapy, tuning forks, oils for his feet. I was doing acupressure points on his feet as well, to just try to keep him grounded. as he continued to struggle to stay alive. And the nephrologist came in and said, well, we're seeing an unusual uptick in his kidneys. And the next day, they continued to get better and they continued to increase in capacity and healing. And the doctor and nurse, this he was in a Catholic hospital here in Richmond, Virginia, and David is Jewish. We've had some very interesting discussions around that. They started calling him Miracle Boy. They didn't even call him by his name, they just called him Miracle Boy because they could not explain how this was happening, how his kidneys were regaining full function, which they did over a week's time. And so we have all the documented medical records from that time period that shows the scar tissue, the fact that they couldn't heal, and the fact that they unexplainedly did. And that's why they're calling him Miracle Boy. They can't explain how that happened. So, but his kidneys did heal. And then he woke up. And then we met again in this life. And it was so awkward because now you meet your soulmate in reverse. And now I have to meet them in the physical. And I don't know what he remembers or what he perceived or experienced or what he might be thinking. All he knows is he went to the hospital and he woke up and it's fall now and everything has changed. He doesn't know what happened. And he had no idea what happened. And he doesn't know me. But there we are. So I continued to do some healing work with him and he continued on this way. He still had a long road of recovery ahead of him with his regaining his lung capacity but his kidneys were fine and things were starting to turn around. There wasn't any sign of brain injury, but he was still very weak and very sick. And he got out of the hospital and then he went back to the West Coast to visit his mom. And then at the time he had his family out there and came back from that experience to go back, try to get back to work. He was still, very ill, but he was going to try to see if he could go back. And then he ended up in the hospital again and nearly died again from another bout of double pneumonia. And that's when we had connected in that time. And he was like, he said, I don't have the conscious memory that you do, except that I have the spiritual soul memory. He said, because when I woke up and saw you, I knew everything about you. I knew I instantly loved you. I knew I was going to marry you. And I just knew everything about your life. And he said, there's no way I could have known any of that. He said, I didn't know your name when I first opened my eyes because we hadn't met, but he knew all of these things. He had the same level of knowing that I had. And so that's essentially what happened. So as the months rolled by, and I mean, as he got out of there, and we were just inseparable. That was it. And so in June of 2006, that following year, we got married, and that was 19 years ago. And now, today is the 20th anniversary of when I was still working with him in the hospital. He didn't go home until October 17th. So we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. His kidneys are still fine. He's doing great. We're both getting older, but we have, health issues like people get when you get older, but we're grateful one day at a time. We've both been very diligent about our recovery work and being better people and trying to bring this message forward that miracles still do happen today, that there is a force greater than us, that there is a life and a consciousness outside of our physical bodies that is greater than what we can even realize, and that the love on the other side is so amazing, so stunningly powerful. I wish if people could just understand even a tiny bit how much they're loved. I mean, that's the thing I see people struggling with, not realizing how worthy they are or how wonderful they truly are. And that you are loved that way. And so when people confuse, well, if you have that kind of knowledge, then why do you have any hard times in life? Or why do you have tough relationships? Or why are people cruel or mean? Or why does anyone put up with that? And we all have our journeys. But I I have a heart for women who have been through so much because I have too. And I having grown up the way that I did, it just strikes me as so pointlessly unnecessary to have to be this way. That can't we evolve? Can we make better choices as we've learned and become better people as people like me keep sharing the same message? We all keep saying the same thing, even if our experiences are different. We're all saying the same thing, that there's love on the other side that is beyond human comprehension or words, and that you are always loved. And so when you realize that you are loved profoundly, I find that shifts things so that you're no longer willing to tolerate someone being treating you in a way that is unloving. You won't do it. It is not, it's not healthy for you or anybody, even for the person who's not treating you in a good way. It's time to break these old energy pathways and focus on love and connection. And it starts with believing that you are loved. And so that's my primary message today is just to remind people that yes, about the consciousness on the other side, but we have to live this life we're here in today. And if you know that you are so loved, that changes things. It changes things. It gives people a sense of security and acceptance, self-acceptance, that they're worthy. And that's the real message that I want to leave folks with. That like I said, when I had the drowning experience at 4 and being out of my body, had no question that we survive consciousness after physical death. There's no question. And then having the experience of David being near death and sharing in that with him, which is the term that I just feel best describes the shared near death experience, what we had, and him being unconscious and out of his body, ready to go. The fact that he was able to come back and have a miraculous, documented, verifiable experience is stunning to me. Even to this day, we just marvel at this gift that we were given. Um, and then we say, well, we have a responsibility to share this story, not in a way like we got to have our soulmate experience, which is wonderful in and of itself. And we're still human beings, but to remind people again that miracles can happen. And a question I get a lot, Natasha, is when people don't come back or they can't come back, or, well, why did you get a miracle and someone I love did not? And and it's not that people aren't loved, but everyone's got a soul path, I believe, like a fingerprint. So they have a soul print and they have to follow that journey. And maybe when their time here on earth is done, even if they know they're leaving might hurt someone left behind, the thing is, when you are in that love, the love wants what's best for that person, no matter what. And so that's where they're coming from. They would think you would love them enough to want them to be happy and at peace and in bliss and let them go. And it's okay because love is here. Love never dies. And and that's so important to think about. It doesn't mean that we won't grieve or that we won't have feelings about losing someone we love dearly in this life, but it might bring a small comfort in our human experience just to remember that the love is so enormous that your loved one is fine. They're more than fine. And they're waiting for you when your time and your soul print is done on this earth. And we will all leave this earth at some point. So when we do, if you can really begin to focus on that love and connection and just remember that when you do go, the people you love will be there.
Well, that was an incredible love story. It reminds me of Brian Weiss, where he talks about meeting up with soulmates, in different lifetimes. Yeah, that is just beautiful.
Hmm.
And you're right, you know, if you love someone enough, you'll let them go and do what they need to do for their soul because nothing is ever permanent. We will meet them again. It's not, if to us it might feel like a long time, but on the other side, it's like a blink of an eye.
Yes.
And your love story, what didn't come without its hardships. I mean, you had to be there every day. You had to show up. He had to go through all that pain and the healing crisis and all of that as
Yes.
well. It's not,
Mm.
yeah.
And we had
Tell
years of
me,
recovery. Hmm.
yeah, and that's wonderful. I mean, I wish that would be a nice thing to look forward to for people. I think. Just about your sons, did they have they improved or anything like that, or is it that their path?
Well, they're doing okay. I mean, both of my sons have had different challenges. I couldn't fix the challenges that they had, but between helping them to accept their life journey and using integrative approaches, medicine is perfectly fine. Eating a healthy diet is fine and important, and getting rest and taking care of yourself in a physical way that nurtures yourself. All these things are important. So I told my son one day, was asking the one who has epilepsy, well, why did I have this? Why do I have to have anything? And I said, we all get something. We all get something. This is your something. And I'm sorry that you have it. And if I could take it away, I would. But there's a reason you do have this, and you get a choice on how you're going to manage it and what lessons you're going to take from this. And if you can understand that you might be an inspiration to somebody else, you might find that there are blessings in this experience, and the blessings come from how you choose to look at it. And I said, you can look at it with self-pity, which is a normal response, or you can look at it with, well, I don't like this, and that's okay. Or you can look at it with, but I have this and I have to deal with it, and I want to have a good life. So how can I have a good life with this thing that I have to manage? And so that's what I'd say to him. Think about it like that. It said, if it's something that you cannot change, then that's where the acceptance piece comes in. And then I said, well, what do you want more in life? What is it that you really want? You know, well, I want to have somebody I love. I want to have a family. I want to have these things. Okay, well, what do you need to do to get that? And when I mentioned that I was teaching that marriage and family relationships class, these were all the same things we talked about day in, day out. And I would always say to people, when you're considering a partner, the first question you have to ask is one of yourself, and that is, are you the type of partner you'd want to be with? And if you're not, you have some work to do before you enter into a relationship, on the one hand. And on the other hand, when I met David, he was on every do not go into a relationship with somebody who's deathly ill, now has major medical bills, has have a former relationship that had just ended, and now has all of this mess to deal with. He was not on my checklist, none of it. So that's my other point, is that people come into your life and they bring you a divine lesson. And David and I couldn't be happier. We're very grateful for this life we've gotten to have. Has it been easy? No, of course not. That doesn't, just because you might be soulmates doesn't mean it's going to be an easy thing. You still have to learn how to live with people who are different from you, because we are different. Find what our common ground is, and just give each other a lot of grace, grace and gratitude. And when we're not at our best, we find that we have a unique sense of humor, and we laugh at each other a lot about, oh, okay, I guess I'm being a pill. He's like, it's okay, I love you anyway, and vice versa. There's just a lot of grace, and just being committed to, again, trying to remind people that, you know, this life is not easy, but it's how we choose and the choices we make. And if we keep choosing to love, and we keep choosing to be kind, and we forgive ourselves when we mess up, and that's the gift. That is the gift. And so that's that's all I just want to remind people again is about love. This is all about love. Love for one another, love for oneself, but understanding that the universal love is accessible to people. It really is. And if you just even believe a kernel of that and have that experience, it's illuminating. So I hope that's been helpful, and then I guess that's where I would leave things today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think it's definitely very inspiring for people. Before we go, do you maybe want to share? I know you've written a book.
We met on the other side. I have this
Then on the other
handy.
side. Oh,
And
lovely.
I just updated the cover because it has about the 20th anniversary.
Oh,
So if
that's
you go
beautiful.
online, the cover looks a little different. You can get it at Amazon. But the reason I wrote the book is because we were on a TV show called The Unexplained with William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk in the Starship Enterprise series, Star Trek. And when we were on the show in their first season in 2019, it was just a 3 minute clip, and they focused on the blue beings, which is fine. I mean, this is Hollywood, right? And they said I claim to be a great healer, which I'm not. So I wanted to set the record straight and just clarify that. And also the love story and the lessons and the hardships that I was going through as a single mom, as a student, and also the prayers that I used when I worked with David were very specific. So I wanted the book to tell people the story that wasn't there, and to give some help and resources for folks that they might be able to use, because I think the power of spoken prayer in an affirmative way, meaning affirming your kidneys are going to be fine, your kidneys are fine. These sorts of things is a very powerful tool with positive implications for clinical use. And so I'd like to do something that, again, is it helpful? Is it going to help expand the conversation? That was the point of writing the book. And I hope that when people read it, as corny as it might sound, I'd like it to be a blessing for them. I've had people write to me and say they felt the energy in the book and they felt shifted by it. That is, to me, the greatest compliment I could ever get, is to think that my contribution helps somebody in this way, because there's only so many podcasts I can do, there's only so many talks I can give, but the book is out there as another way to communicate with people in a way that they can take in their own way. And even now, since writing the book, I have come to understand things a little more differently. So I look at that too, that my awareness has deepened over time. And you know, but that's why we have podcasts too, to say, share a little bit more about what I've learned even since the publication of this book. And um, but the one thing that has never changed, and that is again the message about love, particularly for these times. And I do hope that people really reflect on that, on inviting love into their lives, giving love back, and accepting no less.
Yeah, thank you. Scarlett, before you go, how can people get hold of you if they want to connect?
I do have a website. It's just www.scarlettheinbuch.com. They can Google me. It's got all my information. And I've told people, because of all the recent exposure, I guess because of the 20th anniversary, I've had so many emails that I cannot respond, and I apologize in advance. But I tell people this: if they email me through the contact form, I pray for everyone if they want me to, who emails me. I do read their emails. I promise you that I do. And I sit there and I pray for you right in that moment when I read your email. And then I also prayed for you in my morning and evening prayers. So I want people to know that that is also a way that the second I get their email and read it, I pray that they feel tingles of light and love surrounding them in that moment. And so, whatever it is that they need, whatever it is that they want, whatever is hurting or whatever in their mind that they need, I just pray for love to just surround them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Well, Scarlett, that was great. I just loved hearing your story. And in fact, when you were talking about going meeting him on the other side, I got chills through my body. So there's verification.
Yes.
Yeah. All
Thank
right.
you.
Well,